the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Hello, my name is Jenn Zahrt, and welcome to Within Orb, a production of the Celestial Arts Education Library, a podcast bringing people together around the love of astrology, books. Join me as I interview people about the astrology books that changed their life and practice. You can support the podcast at withinorb.com. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and coming in from a secret location in the Jers, I'm pleased to introduce you to Gabriel Rosas. Gabe, take it away.
Hi, everyone. How's it going?
It's awesome. I'm so glad you're here.
I am very glad to be here myself. It's nice to see all the books.
Yeah, there's a lot of books behind me, and you are in a very amazing outside of time and space TARDIS. Is this?
Yes, this is a TARDIS from like a old Doctor Who episode.
Amazing. So one thing I love about how this show is developing is that I've known you for years, and I've never asked you what your first astrology book was. So how did you get into astrology?
Well, I mean, as a child, I did end up reading Linda Goodman's Sun Signs because it was in the library, and I was sort of interested, and it was kind of interesting. I mean, when I got serious about it, I was already starting my career in data analytics, working in New York. And there was someone at work who I saw him had astrology charts from like astro.com on his monitor. And I was like, what the hell are you doing? And he's like, oh, he's using astrology to do his stock picks.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, that's just such nonsense, right? And he was like, nope, you don't know what you're talking about. You like straight up like, you don't know what you're talking about.
I love that New York attitude.
You read a book, read that book. And it was Horoscope Symbols by Rob Hans. So that's like the first real astrology book I read.
That is such an awesome entry point. What impressed you about Rob Hans' Horoscope Symbols when you got into it?
That it was actually a very considered intellectual, logical thing. I was expecting, something with like old biddies and with blue hair and, sort of new age psychism thing. And this was like actually a serious and also complicated topic. Oh, yes. One of the advantages of that book is that it's not super definitive about things. It's very explaining his understanding of the time. And this was, I guess, before he got really into the traditions. So he was definitely more of a modern, I guess, in his approach, but still there's a lot of leeway there. And so it's like, okay, there's a lot there and there's something there, but I'm not clear what it is. So it got me into it enough that I had to go and try to read more and pick up other books. And rather quickly, I fell into the tradition sort of space because while the stuff that I'd seen was interesting, it was all sort of psych stuff. And I was sort of unconvinced a little bit about psychology in general, maybe in an ungenerous way, probably. And then looking at what I saw, it was something online. And it was an old medical horary. And it was like some dire thing, like, oh, he took to bed such and such a time, and I did the decumbiture, and he's gonna be dead in 3 days. And so it was. And it was like,
oh my God.
I want to know how to do that.
True crime astrology. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that sounds like real.
Yeah.
Because it's something that's obvious, whether you're gonna live or die. And very quickly I fell into Robert Zoller and saw some of his stuff online. This was like on the cusp of when he just about started working with some people in England and did a course. And so let me do the basic course. I did the basic course. It was like interesting because, okay, it looked like astrology, but didn't look like anything I had really seen out of the modern stuff. Then there's like, okay, now the diploma one's out. And then it was like my normal sort of fit and starts thing where I do something, I stop and I get back to it after some time. And so eventually I digested his course. In the course of that, he mentioned some books. At that period, it was like I wasn't reading books. It was all this coursework stuff. But he's mentioning Bonatti and he's mentioning Ali Khayyat, some other people. And so there was no Bonatti back then available, but there was Ali Khayyat that James Holden did, I think. And it was like this little book, a green cover, and this awful typeset. This like awful 80s printer typeset. It would look terrible, but it had all the stuff in it. And interested me, it was like, it wasn't quite what Zoller was saying in terms of elements of practice. Khayyat is working off of Mashallah and Sale and, there's these early Islamic authors. They're not really using quadrant houses. They're doing whole sign and they're doing that sort of thing. It's like, okay, that's different and more interesting. And it seems to work better than what I was already doing. So all right, now I need to find out more about that. And then you keep getting sucked more and more into the past as I felt like. I guess part of my prejudices at the time and probably still now is I wanted something that wasn't monotheistic. Because Muslim authors, they're Muslims. People like William Lilly and all these, European guys, Christians. I want something that's older. And then it's like, okay, well, then it has to be like something like Valens when you find out who Valens is like that. And Firmicus, and it's like, okay, but who's doing that? And then this is how I get sucked into Project Hindsight. And I sort of get sucked into that. And Robert Schmidt was at the point where he was like, oh, I'm going to try to revitalize my thing and start doing a lecture. And it was like the first thing I went to down in Cumberland, Maryland, where they were, was their whole thing on the hermetic lots. They did like a weekend long symposium thing on the hermetic lots. And so that was my first time getting down there and meeting them.
I had no idea that you actually went to a Project Hindsight event. That's amazing.
I went to a couple. There was that one. There was the 12 parts one they did. There was something else. There was the aspects ones they did.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And then I went a couple more times and then I had life overtook me and then I sort of drifted away from that. But then I had all this stuff, not just the stuff that I saw when I got there, but just the ideas that he was playing around with in terms of Platonism and just the Hellenic philosophy in general.
Like how time is different.
Yeah, how time is different. How time is not a uniform thing, but a thing that is being modulated by the planets in some fashion. Not an obvious fashion, not a thing you can measure in a meter, but it's doing something. Time is not some static thing. And all sorts of ideas like that. And it was also sort of changes the relationship to books because books are important, right? We all love books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, actually, now that you pointed out Robert Zoller's Lost Art of Prediction about the Arabic parts was one of my first books, actually. I mean, when I went to Powell's to pick up a bunch of astrology books when I was starting to learn, that was on the shelf. And I was like, oh, this is cool. This looks neat. And I had no idea that I was getting medieval before I got medieval. And like, because he was one of the first major book contracts to go out and like popularize that facet of medieval in, I would say, like the modern era.
Yeah, that was out there, and it's trippy because it's all basically one chunk of Bonatti, and then he like has some commentary, but he's pretty much just giving you the straight Bonatti.
Yeah,
you're reading parts about the suitability of women.
Oh and man,
like, and like this is some dark Northern Catholic stuff that Bonatti's bringing in, like oof. But then there's other things that are like, oh, this actually makes sense, But you get that, and then you're like, okay, it doesn't make sense to me. Why doesn't it make sense to me? Is it wrong? A lot of people jump to, oh, it doesn't apply now because it's modern day. But that's not reality because we know it because we're actually deep into it. We understand that there's some adjustment that has to be made because of the sort of changes that occurred. But essentially, they're still correct. It's just adapting circumstance, but also having to adapt. It's like, how do you understand this astrologically? And so they're very useful in sort of altering how you perceive all the astrological elements to be, all the things you have to factor in. It's a process of digestion. Like books are great, but they need to be digested. And this is not, fortunately, it's not a linear or a fast process especially for some of these authors who are not even writing. They're not writing in a sort of modern way. They're not writing in a way that's very comprehensive instead of breaking every little thing out to tiny pieces. They're giving you these sort of meaning and sort of intuitive, logical.
It's like the fruits of the work, right? Instead of the step-by-step, it's really much like an extreme example that you can extrapolate from.
Yeah. It's like you're reading Euclid. And which is the thing that Schmidt pointed out. He's describing how things in Euclid, describes how this is a right triangle, how this is that, and the other thing. But it doesn't tell you step by step what he did. You see some logic, and then you have to work out the deduction from that. You just get the induction into it.
Or you have to go to class and hear it from the professor because that's a textbook kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so the internal work is getting to, okay, that's why he's saying that. And that takes time.
Speaking of time, more time, I see you in this TARDIS now, and I'd like to send you maybe to an escape room. And you can have 3 books with you. Find your way out. What would be the 3 books you would take with you?
We're not counting the ephemeris, right?
Correct. You get to have an ephemeris always. That's a given, obviously, right? Everybody who's worth their salt in astrology needs to just have that next to you. So
Exactly. It would probably be like Valens.
all right, so let's start from the top. So you're bringing Valens with you?
Yes.
Why did you pick him?
I think the great advantage of Valens is that a working astrologer is essentially in this book teaching a student what he's doing. And that is sort of vital because in that period of time, we have very little sources available to us at the moment. And what we do have is very Spartan in its information. So it's barely enough to figure out what's going on. You have to do a lot of sort of imagining how these things fit together. He gives you enough there where you can start to think about why you're doing this. It isn't just following it by rote, although he has tons of examples and it's like combinations of planets, et cetera, all these time lords. But you need to really digest that and see how he's going about it. If it was in person, it would be one thing because then you'd have like the actual instruction of a teacher. You don't have that when you're reading this book. So you have to find that teacher within almost and like just try to discover and let the thing marinate. Also part of that process, you're bringing sort of the modern spell of how we think the world exists, how we think mechanical physics applies to everything, how everything is empirical. That's like the way to knowledge. Getting into traditional astrology or like these sort of traditional wisdom traditions helps blow all that up and let you see that as just a very narrow perspective and brings you into a different world.
Imagine stepping into a room of 5,000 astrology books, turning a corner and stepping into a room of 2,000 more. The Celestial Arts Education Library is every astrologer's dream, and it can be yours. I invite you to come support CAELi before you can visit physically. Your support will mean the creation of 52 new episodes of Within Orb next year, 4 issues of the CAELi Review, our inaugural journal, and countless book talks, events, classes for our community. Visit our website, www.caeli.institute/support, to select your level of care. Please help support CAELi into the future, our future, so that we may study the future together. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy the rest of the show.
Was Valens. Firmicus is much in the same vein, although interesting with him because he clearly knows a lot about astrology, but I don't know if he's a practicing astrologer. It feels more like it's just a really enthusiastic guy who has access to books like that. We're not going to get because they're gone or they're buried somewhere in some university. So
you think he had access to more books than he lets on that we might not even know?
Well,
about?
One, he lets on that he has all these books.
Yeah.
There's this one particular text he keeps referring to that has like delineations for every single minute.
Oh, yes. Yes.
There's that one book. It's like, oh, great. You could have just included it with this.
I really wonder how the history of astrology would have changed if we had that book that delineates the meaning of every single arc minute of every single degree of the zodiac, because that is a lot of delineation.
Yeah. And I have to imagine if it's the style that a lot of these books were, it would be super aphoristic. It would literally be like, not even maybe barely a proper sentence for every single thing. And it would be like mysteriously written.
Like if you think you're doom scrolling now, just wait.
Exactly. Maybe there's a good reason why it was lost. But, because again, we have no control over anything, right? So this is our destiny. That we're working with a tradition that we don't have all the bits and pieces and sort of.
So what is it about Firmicus that draws you more than, you could have picked any other guy and you got him on the list. Like, why Firmicus?
There's a lot in there, and there are things in there that are like the missing pieces that are missing out of balance.
Mm.
They sort of work together. Like one, you're getting the whole thing with the whole breaking out of the houses, planets and houses, which is not something Valens spends a terrible amount of time with at all. He's very much focused on what the planets are doing. Some stuff with the houses, but part of this is a difference in approach, but also difference in importance. Like what is a house doing that a planet isn't doing, and vice versa. And what is that actual 10? Like you have the planets being gods, being very active and having very clear ideas of what they want to do and what they don't want to do. And then you have houses and signs and how there's the interrelation there, but how those are more areas. They're not so much individuals doing things, more places where things happen. and how the place itself modifies action and forces action to conform to it, in the sense of like me walking down the sidewalk is different from me trying to hike through the hills, like outside where you are. Very different world, very different thing. I can't just like have a nice, easy, get my 6,000 steps hiking up in the hills in the wet, animals and whatnot, and whatever. It's a much more grueling process.
I just want to dwell with that though, because you're saying like circumstances forcing action. Wow, it's like, how many times a day do we think about that material constraint on how we are versus this mental life of like, it's a new day, I can do what I want. Today I'm going to do all of these things. And so maybe it's a privilege to actually be in this position. And there are others who are very much confronted with that incapacity, or like in a way like limitations from the outside in or inside out or whatever that is. But like just thinking about like how the conditions force action, what you said, it's like, oh my gosh, that's a huge flip of agency.
Well, it's a question of agency. Like, how do you even have it? That's the whole free will thing, right?
Yeah.
And I've sort of come to the place where I'm trying to understand the freedom of knowing there isn't any, and just trying to, okay, life is the way it is. It isn't because, I messed up all these things and it put me in this place, or I got, I was lucky and whatever. It happened because it was going to happen. I did the things I was supposed to do. Here I am. And so there's a liberation there, because it's, I don't have to have guilt about not doing X, Y, and Z, because X, Y, and Z wasn't going to happen. I did ABC, or, so I missed an opportunity that wasn't meant to be. And for me, this is the thing, because I am like, anyone who really knows me knows how horribly critical and unforgiving I can be. and to be put in this position as well, and there is nothing to be forgiven for. You didn't do anything wrong. You just, what's supposed to happen is, for me, disconcerting.
I think it's funny you say that, because you were the first person who is always liking and loving and commenting on anything online, like faster than anyone. I'm like, oh, Gabe got there first, of course. It's almost instantaneous, and it's like you're showing so much love and support.
It's the Gemini thing. It's like, I have that.
The Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah, I'm sincere about all of that. I want to support people and hope that they do well and they're prosperous and having a great time and all that. But then there's the flip side where I am not that. And for me, I tend to be very hard on myself more than I am on anybody else. But that's like sort of the internal world. The internal world is like very sort of high expectation sort of thing. So, but it's interesting and disconcerting. Do not feel like I have to carry anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I know there's some other spiritual traditions where when it comes to something like envy or jealousy, it's like others are doing what's meant for them and you're doing what's meant for you in all of the ways that needs to happen across the journey of your life. And so when you say like, oh, they've got this and I want that, and it's like, yeah, but your fate is yours to have. And it's not going to be theirs either, right? So if we know our charts, then we can understand not just what's going to happen, but also when.
Yeah, and being allowed to have that foreknowledge that is destined.
But does it ever make you impatient if you see something and you're like, oh, it's away, like it's like a year ahead of me, and you're just like, can I just accelerate? Do you ever get that feeling?
I think I do. And then obviously the converse, it's like, I need that to not work out the way I think.
Right. Like maybe like a more malefic situation ahead, and you're just like, it's coming. What is it gonna really be?
Yeah, I mean, it's the perverse thing of knowing astrology and being like, okay, I'm not gonna look at my own chart terribly closely because I kind of want to not know. I want to not know in the sense of maybe not trying to jinx anything, but also not trying to torment myself.
Yeah, you want to maintain the illusion of free will.
Yeah.
By just not looking.
Yeah. Because it's just ignorance. It's not really free will. It's just ignorance of the reality that you're in. So it's like, make a little place for my ignorance.
Yeah.
let's not cast it off just yet. I'm still conditioned by self-grasping that I can't just I just let it go.
Yeah. Well, there's another flip side to that though, where if you did look at the possible unfoldment of a lifetime, then you know that you're past the challenges, like the big rapids that would be promised in the planetary cycles and such. And you're still alive. You're like, that's never going to happen again. I'm literally free from that tough stuff. And it doesn't mean more tough stuff won't happen, but it's like kind of like, oh, that's extreme and that's not happening anymore. So now I can kind of have fun.
Yes. But it's like, I survived that?
Yeah. Well, when we're talking also about trauma, it's like, if you can look at the cycles and patterns and you see something traumatic and it's over and it's not coming again because it's maybe a secondary progression or it's some kind of direction that has passed, primary direction aspects, etc. And it's like, oh, that's not indicated for the next 90 years. Woohoo! Let's party, right? Like, and then you can kind of like make closure with it because there's no anticipation of it happening again. You don't have to anticipate, like, is it going to ever happen again? It's like, that's never going to happen again. It's like, oh my God.
But then you get those time lords that are repeaters or like transpositions of certain things like decennials or perfections, where it's like, okay, this isn't quite the way it happened the other time.
But it always hurts the first time you rip off the Band-Aid, right? It's the worst. The first time is the worst.
I mean, even then there's like the little things like in Firmicus. I think there's a bit where you get the impression that Saturn things are way worse in those first 30 years than afterwards, which I think I can attest to myself because some of those awful Saturnian Time Lord moments were like, oh, younger. And after 30, it's like, okay, it ain't that bad at all, really. But before, it's like, oh, I almost died. Oh, I was completely destroyed by this. Oh.
Completely destroyed.
Now I'm like, oh, I just feel bad.
I'm just like, remembering the bad times.
Yeah, now I'm just like, I just feel like, eh.
Yeah. So your third book.
Antiochus. The one that I think is the really good one, which is the one that Robert Schmidt did. Essentially, this is his last book. That is his attempt to reconstruct the original text using all the fragments that exist in Pretorius and following the Byzantine, essentially, table of contents. Apparently, the Byzantines had this book, but the only thing that has managed to get into the Greek astrological texts is basically the table of contents. The book is about this, that, and the other thing, and all 29, 30 subjects. And then scattered through all these other texts like Pretorius and Vettius and whatever, bits and pieces of fragments of Antiochus. He collated them all together and then sort of commentates on it.
Wow.
And so I think it's very valuable because whether this was the book or not, clearly it's an attempt to reconstruct lost text, but it's in it in spirit because these are primary definitions of basic astrological things that no one really takes the time to do. No one really takes the time to actually define these things. And he goes in a very mystical manner. And this is part of Robert Schmidt's thing, that these books are written in a mysterious manner that you have to like digest and like decipher in a sense. For one example of that, he does the thing where the middle of the book, like the 15th proposition or the 15th sort of definition, is about being under the beams of the sun and how it hides everything. And so this is a tell that this whole thing is, you have to read this whole thing in a mysterious manner. And this is like the sort of approach these ancient texts are following, that are not spelling everything out for everybody. In a way, because you can't, because these things require this individual sense that you have to develop, this sense of judgment. No one can tell you that, and you can't just act on it robotically. AI is never going to figure that out. When they actually figure out an AI. Right now, this is like just a weird text search thing. So when it cobbles together stuff, it'll just rip pieces out of an old text and put it in some vague English thing where it sounds like it's the delineation, but it's not. It's just a collation of words.
Yeah, I learned a new word about that. It's arrogant. Like it's an error, but it's very proud of it. It's like,
That's like most of social media.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's funny. Hearing you of all people sitting in the jurors talking about being under the beams, I'm like, this is some kind of like mafia moment, like there's some kind of Sopranos situation here under the hood of Hellenistic astrology where they're like, shh, guys, you know what I mean? This is really powerful stuff. We got to keep it under wraps. So we're just going to drip this. We're going to destroy some of that. And we're going to hide the bodies over here.
Yeah, if anybody opens their mouth, if anybody's a rat,
right?
You're going to get got.
It's like, you're in trouble, you're in trouble.
mean, he puts that curse in there. Valens does anyway.
Oh, yeah. That comes in a lot. I mean, even when you say, like Lily is a Christian, it's like that whole preamble to Christian astrology, calling it Christian astrology was also a cover.
Yeah.
So that he could get past the censors. And there's like, yeah, there's that. Here we go. Of course it's Christian. It's not, though.
I mean, he was a weird sort of Christian. I mean, it's hard to pin him down.
My favorite nickname for Lily is Piss Prophet.
Well, it's because you could, that was part of practice, right? In diagnosing.
Yeah. People would come to him with like vials of pee and be like, what happened?
Yeah.
And then he'd go write the question down and check out the chart and be like, well, he did this and this and this, and he's not going to make it.
He's not going to make it, right? These stars are in the wrong places and it has an awful color. That's clearly
Yeah. But it was like you had to have not just the question, but the urine. You had to see what color it was. And there was a dial at the Getty Museum. They had a whole exhibition on alchemy. And they had this like color wheel of pee. So you had like, moving on. Okay, so
drink water, people. That's the thing. You need to drink your water. Drink your 8 glasses a day.
Drink water and then immerse yourself in astrology and let it take its time. It takes the time it takes.
Yes.
This is all fascinating stuff. So do you teach?
One of the many things I have yet to get to. It's going to happen because I think I've realized that this is part of what I'm supposed to be doing. Not that I don't love reading charts for people, but I don't do a lot of it. And explaining these things seems to be where I'm being drawn to.
I loved your NORWAC lecture on profections. If you guys are listening and interested, Gabe has a recording available through the NORWAC, Northwest Astrological Conference, on profections.
Yeah. I'm planning to do one on my own where I might throw in some more stuff.
Yeah. Can you get like hourly and then like minutely profections? Can you do like so?
I think you can. I think the question is why. Why would you be that?
Because I've got every planet in Virgo. That's why.
Exactly. Probably. But yeah, I mean, I guess my very basic impression is because it's a unit of time.
Yeah.
You can apply a perfection to it. But it has to be a discrete unit. And particularly following the way Paulus does it. So an hour, yeah, I could see no problem doing that. Going through the hours.
Yeah, but then you got to ask if it's a planetary hour or one of these more like standardized 60-minute hours.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the point of like innovation. Because again, Paulus doesn't mention any of this, but it stands to reason that you could do it. And then it's a question of like, okay, you probably could do it either way if you wanted to, or both.
I always say both.
You always
I always go for both.
Why choose? We're not obligated to choose. Unless we are.
Well, maybe there's a system or a reason why one's applicable and then a different reason why the other's applicable. And if you know how to do both, and even maybe more than both, why stay binary? But yes, okay, so teaching eventually. So what would you recommend somebody new to astrology? Like what book should they use to get into it? Even though I know, you're actually saying like books are one way, but actually, it's not all about books. But let's pick a book. Pick a book for people to pick.
I mean, at this point, would you say do the traditional stuff? Not that I hate the modern stuff.
You'd have them start at the beginning.
I'd have them start at the beginning. I wouldn't throw them into the deep and have them read the root texts just yet. I guess I would have to say read Demetra's books, Demetra George's 2-volume set. I would start with that. Or on The Heavenly Spheres by Avalar and Ribeiro.
Yep, the blue book.
The big blue book.
Yeah.
Because it's a great workbook. I mean, the advantage is that they're all workbooks. They get your feet wet. They get your sea legs under you. Just so you understand sort of what's going on. And then as soon as you're through that, then I would say, okay, jump into these older books. Jump into Valens. Probably Valens more than anything. I would do Firmicus later.
Okay.
And Antiochus is not available yet, but apparently the new people at Hindsight are going to eventually publish.
I have a copy.
I have a copy too.
It's out of print. So come to CAELi when you want to read Antiochus. Become a member of CAELi.
Yeah.
Everything finds you in time, and then you turn around and realize it was there all along.
Mm.
Yeah. So fun to talk to you. Thank you for coming on the show. Is there anything else you want to have people know about where to find you or what you're up to this year astrologically or anything like that?
I'm going to attend NORWAC. I'm not talking, but I'm going to be there. So if you're there, I will be there. Try to grab me. I'll be there. I have my website, which is GabrielRosasAstrology.com.
And that'll be in the show notes.
It's in the show notes. Hopefully I'll do some more podcasts either here or with somebody else or something.
Yeah.
Other than that, there's my ears open until,
Amazing.
the stars tell me otherwise.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Within Orb. To learn more about the Celestial Arts Education Library, or to become a member, visit our website at CAELi.institute. That's www.caeli.institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word. Follow or subscribe to Within Orb in your podcatcher of choice, rate it 5 stars, or write us a happy review. This helps others find the show. We also want to give a big thanks to the indie band The E-Block for contributing their song Wake Up for our intro and outro music. You can find them at their website, eblockband.com. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next time.